Things I've seen a lot of students struggle with in 4th grade is addition and subtraction. And it's not that they are incapable of adding and subtracting, but when we get to higher numbers and we talk about the actual ways that we add and subtract and the rules, we have to go back to basics because they didn't understand the basics of borrowing and moving to the next place value. So one thing that I have found really helpful are these base 10 units. So I make sort of a mat that has the basic 4 place values going back to 2nd grade. We have the ones, tens, hundreds, and thousands. It's a huge cube. And so these are pretty accurate as far as representing that in the tens place, 1 unit of 10 would be equal to 10 little cubes. So I often call these units, rods, flats, and cubes. We don't use a lot of cubes because we're getting into pretty big numbers here for little units. But so then given any math problem, addition or subtraction, if we're going to do, let's say, 15 minus 4. First, I'm going to represent 15 on my place value mat. So 1 rod and 5 units. And then I'm subtracting 4. So I just take away 4 units, count what's left. You get 11. That's the absolute most basic. And I feel that when students have started with that in the primary grades, the bigger numbers make a little bit more sense. So we're talking about when we get into regrouping. For example, 20 minus 16. So I need 2 rods. That's what I'm starting with. And then I subtract 16. So I subtract 10. And then this process of regrouping. I can't take 6 units off of this. I can't split up the tens. So I need to grab some units and match up 10. And this is very tactile. This is very kid-friendly because they can see that 10 little units is equal to 1 rod. So I slide those over. Now I have units to play with and to subtract from. So I regrouped from the tens to the ones. And that's what happens when you vertically subtract 20 minus 16. You say, okay, 0 minus 6. I can't do that, so I have to borrow. I take a 10 away from the tens place, and I get 10 little ones. Then 10 minus 6 is 4. 1 minus 1 is 0. That's the same thing that you're doing here. You just take away 6 units, and you're left with 4. So it's the actual physical, literal, tactile way for kids to see the subtraction regrouping. And then when you get into larger numbers, like we do in 4th grade, obviously sometimes those numbers go into the millions, but the concept is the same. So I can use numbers that are all less than 1,000, all within the manipulatives that I have, and still model this concept. So sometimes what I will do is I'll either do a race to a cube for addition, or a race to 0 for subtraction. So with the race to a cube, race to a cube is adding. So we'd start off with nothing. And then I would have students roll dice, just a standard dice, 1 through 6. And every time they roll that dice, they add that number to their place value mat. They roll a 4. Okay, then they roll a 6, okay? Now they have regrouped from the ones column to the tens. And in any place value, the greatest value is 9. So the greatest value here is 9 tens, or 90. The greatest value here is 900. So this could be it could be 99 because you would have 10 here and 10 here. But the most tens, the most rods you can have here is 9. The most hundreds or flats you can have here is 9 or 900. And then once you get above that, you have to regroup to the next place value. The race to 0 is subtraction. That's where you start with your cube of 1,000. And every time you roll the dice, you have to subtract that number. So obviously, fairly quickly, they're going to have to regroup because anything less than 1,000 goes into flats. So really, all you need for each group is about 15 of each. Now, I was lucky enough to have another teacher that gave me her set. But if you don't have enough, it might be a good center